Hey fam. Look, we've been talking about this lifelong adventure that is learning to know and follow God. And we understand that part of this faith adventure is learning how you best connect with your Creator. And last week, we talked about how important other people are on our journey. And we said that our relationships are a choice, not an accident. So today, I want to talk to you about another thing that's going to help you along your journey towards knowing and following God. And that's learning how to share our own stories of faith. And I know there's a few reasons that you might have questions or objections about this. You might think, I don't even know what I think about God yet, so how am I supposed to share? We'll talk about that. Or maybe you're thinking, you know what, I still have so far to go on my journey, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to share. We'll talk about that too, because you also have a story to share. Now, unlike most adventure stories, our stories of faith don't get written at the end of the journey. They get written along the way. Kind of like the Avengers or Harry Potter, The Office or Stranger Things. I mean, we're all excited to find out how these stories will end, but the real fun is watching the story move forward, step by step, even when we're not sure what's going to happen next. Now, part of the magic of these stories is that we don't know how or when they're going to end. We watch these characters and this story grow and change for years at a time. Just like those stories that so many of us know and love, you don't need to know how your story ends in order for it to matter and make a difference. So what's your story about? Your story is about who you are. It's about where you've come from and where you're going. It's about how you've discovered God in the midst of it all. Your story is still in progress, and that's such a good thing. See, the power of stories is woven into the very fabric of our faith. The Bible is literally a giant book of stories, detailing people's hopes and experiences with God. I mean, it talks about this divine being that speaks life into existence. I mean, the rise and fall of kingdoms and empires, underdogs, misfits, redemption, renewal, heartache and joy, death and life. And with that in mind, let's take a look at a story out of the book of Mark. You see, in chapter 5, this story starts with verse 1, but for time's sake, I'm only going to read you verses 18 through 20, but here's the skinny on it. There's this guy who is demon-possessed, and he's living amongst the tombs or the caves where they lay dead people to rest, and the townspeople, they can't do anything about this guy. And that's when Jesus shows up on the scene and rids him of all the demons. And at the end of it, Jesus gets in the boat to leave. And that's where I want to pick up in verse 18. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. But Jesus said, "No, go home to your family and tell them everything the Lord has done for you and how merciful he has been." So the man started off to visit the 10 towns of that region and began to proclaim the great things Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed at what he told them. Now, that's a crazy story. The Bible is full of stories just like this, but there's something interesting about this particular story. In this story, Jesus tells this man to turn around and share his story with others. This man's life had been radically changed by Jesus. I mean, he didn't have all the answers. He didn't have his faith completely figured out, and he had a lot further to go on his journey, but Jesus told him to talk about it anyway. Now, just like Jesus invited this man to share in his story, when it's still in progress, God invites you and me to do the same. No matter how recently you've met Jesus, no matter how much he's changed your life, you're already invited to share that story with others. Your story is in progress. It's not complete, but that doesn't mean you should be quiet and not share it. Now check it. When I was younger, there's a period of time in my life where I did all the things. And whatever you're thinking about the thing, the answer is probably, yeah, I did that. I did it because I wanted to be in control. I did it because I wanted to be the captain of my own life, and I wanted to make all the decisions based on what I wanted. And when Jesus got a hold of me, man, he changed that desire inside of me. He taught me that I'm better off with him leading than I could ever be on my own. I mean, the truth is, I've disappointed myself far more than anybody else I know. So why would I continue to trust in me to make the best decisions? And if I'm keeping it 100 with you, man, I still struggle with the idea of control. Now, hopefully you're not too surprised about that. Just because I teach about Jesus does not mean that I've always had things figured out, because I haven't, and I still don't. Jesus transformed my life then, but he's going to need to continue to transform it today and tomorrow, because my journey is not complete. Just like yours, it's still in progress. Now, you've heard my story. Let's talk about your story, because sharing it is going to help you. Now, maybe you now know that you have a story to tell and you're ready to share it, or maybe not. Maybe you're still a little skeptical about your own story. Maybe you think that your story isn't very interesting, right? You're too young, your life's too boring. Or maybe you've had a really hard life and you'd rather not even think about it, let alone tell someone else about it. Or maybe you're too ashamed. You're too ashamed to share your story because it will require you talking about things that you're afraid to admit. You see, wherever you are in your journey, you have a story to share. And sharing it is going to help you get to know God better than you ever have before. I mean, you're writing your story as we speak. So let's take a few minutes to do that. Write stories. I challenge you, or rather, I invite you to share some of your story in the comments below. This is an exercise that is meant just for you. This isn't the only way for you to tell your story, but it's one way to help you begin to share your story more clearly. By now, you see that you do have a story, but the question is why? Why would I share it? Well, here's a few reasons. Because someone needs to hear it. Just like the stories of transformation we heard today, someone needs to hear how Jesus transformed your life. They need to hear about the hope that you have in Jesus. Because sharing your story, man, it helps you see things a bit more clearly. As you begin to write out your story, you begin to realize and remember all the things that Jesus has done for you. Because sharing your story, it reminds you of all the gratitude check it. Have you ever written a letter to someone, a thank you note to someone, or I don't know, you've written in somebody's yearbook about how grateful you were that they're in your life? Man, when you're mid-sentence, it just hits you and you're like, oh my goodness, I really am grateful. And sharing your story is kind of like that. It's going to help remind you just how grateful and how much you have to be grateful for. And here's the other thing. Sharing your story reminds you of the hope that you have. It reminds you, even when things are dark and strange now, that you trusted in God before and He showed up. And it's going to help remind you and whoever you're sharing with that they can trust in Him now because He'll show up. So really, that's all I have for you. Remember, your story is not done. It's still in progress, and that's a good thing. So start sharing. Students, I would love to see you any Wednesday night, every Wednesday night at 6:30 on Zoom. Password is TFF Next. Description is, or the link is in the description down below, right? So come on and jump in. And to everybody else, I love you, and I miss your faces.